The sun had just started to rise over the small town of Ridgeview, casting a soft orange glow over rows of quiet houses. Birds were already awake, singing in the trees that lined the streets. The world looked peaceful, still untouched by the noise of the day. In one of those houses lived a man named James Hunter, someone the neighborhood knew only as a calm, polite, middle-aged guy who kept mostly to himself. No one had any idea that he had once been one of the most skilled and trusted men in the United States military. James liked mornings the best. They were quiet. No one knocking on the door, no phone calls, no surprises. Just him, the smell of coffee, and the steady breathing of his dog, Rex. The Belgian Malinois always seemed to understand him without words. When James moved, Rex moved. When James sighed, Rex tilted his head as if to ask if everything was okay. They were more than man and dog. They were partners bound by years of service and survival. Outside, the neighborhood was starting to wake up. Kids rode bikes to school and a few joggers passed by. James always waved but rarely stopped to talk. He wasn't unfriendly, just private. After decades of high-stress missions and endless travel, he had chosen this quiet corner of the country to finally live a simple life. He didn't tell stories about his past, and he didn't hang his medals on the wall. Those years were over, at least that's what he told himself. Inside his home, the walls were plain. There were a few framed pictures, nothing that would catch a stranger's eye. A photo of a younger James standing beside Rex in a dusty foreign field was tucked behind another frame. It wasn't that he wanted to hide it. He just didn't want to explain it. The past was something he respected but didn't revisit. Now he focused on everyday things. Fixing a leaky faucet, mowing the lawn, feeding Rex, taking walks to the nearby lake. Every morning, James took Rex for a walk at the same time. The pair had become a familiar sight. Some neighbors thought Rex was a police dog because of his sharp eyes and perfect posture. Kids sometimes waved from a distance, but few ever got close. James always smiled softly and said, "He's friendly, but he's protective." That was enough to make people keep a respectful distance. After their walk, James would head to his garage. It wasn't cluttered with tools like most men's garages. His was neat, almost too neat. Everything had its place. A workbench, a few sealed crates, and an old military trunk he never opened in front of anyone. Inside were memories that carried too much weight. Photos, patches, a folded flag, and a few personal items from missions that never made the news. He had been part of something few people even knew existed. Years ago, he had led teams through impossible missions, sometimes in places not even marked on maps. He had seen things that changed him forever, but he had also learned one thing. Peace is the hardest thing to hold on to. That was why he valued his quiet life now. He wasn't running from anything. He was protecting the peace he had fought so hard to earn. Rex had been there through it all. They had trained together, deployed together, and even been injured together. When Rex was retired from service, James refused to let anyone else take him. "He's my responsibility," he'd said. That bond never broke. Even in this peaceful town, Rex stayed alert, always watching, always ready. But with James, he was gentle, playful even. He loved chasing tennis balls in the yard, though he'd still return them with the precision of a soldier returning gear. Most afternoons, James spent time helping his older neighbor, Mr. Keller, with odd jobs. Mr. Keller was a retired teacher who often said, "You're a quiet man, James, but I can tell you've lived." James would only smile and nod. He liked helping out, fixing fences, repairing mailboxes, trimming branches. It gave him purpose. In the evenings, he'd sit on his porch with Rex lying at his feet, watching the sunset in silence. The townspeople had small conversations about him sometimes. Harmless curiosity. Nice guy. That James. Yeah, but he keeps to himself. Probably ex-military. Look at that posture, they weren't wrong. But none of them would ever guess just how high up he'd been, or what he had done to earn his calm. James's house sat at the edge of a small wooded area. It was quiet there, maybe too quiet for some, but he liked the stillness. The trees reminded him of the forests he'd trained in, and the smell of pine felt familiar. Sometimes late at night he'd take Rex into the woods and walk beneath the stars. He said little, but Rex didn't need words. They had their own language, short gestures, looks, and the rhythm of footsteps. Life had finally settled into something steady. That's what James wanted most, routine, predictability. After years of chaos, it was a strange kind of therapy. He even started volunteering at the local animal shelter, helping train rescue dogs. He didn't tell anyone about his military experience, but the staff quickly noticed how the most nervous dogs calmed down around him. There was something in the way he moved, calm, steady, confident. Animals felt it right away. One Saturday morning, James stood in his kitchen pouring coffee while the radio hummed softly in the background. Rex lay by the back door, eyes half closed, enjoying the morning light. It was an ordinary day and the kind he loved. He planned to work on his truck, maybe drive into town for supplies. Nothing special, just another peaceful day. He had no idea that in a matter of hours, that peace would be shattered in a way that would change everything. For now, though, everything was still. He stepped out into the yard, coffee mug in hand, breathing in the crisp air. Rex followed, tail wagging slightly. The world seemed good, simple. James didn't know that someone a few streets away had just dialed 911 about a suspicious man tinkering with equipment in his garage. The caller didn't mean harm. They just didn't recognize him and thought something strange was happening. That one call would set off a chain of events that no one in the town would forget. But at this moment, James was calm. He opened the garage door, revealing his neatly arranged space. Inside, sunlight reflected off a few metal tools and a dusty old helmet sitting on the shelf. He reached up, took the helmet down, and ran his hand over it. It wasn't just a piece of equipment, it was a reminder. He thought about how much life had changed since the days when every sunrise meant another mission, another unknown danger. Now the biggest concern in his life was whether the lawn needed mowing. He smiled at that thought. Peaceful days were rare gifts. He'd learned to appreciate them. Rex sat nearby, head tilted, watching him closely. "You remember, don't you?" James said softly. Rex gave a quiet bark, as if answering yes. Sometimes James wondered if people could ever really leave the past behind. He had spent so many years in places where every decision meant life or death. It changed how he saw the world. Even here, in safety, his mind stayed alert. He noticed details, the sound of tires on gravel, the subtle shift in the wind, footsteps that didn't belong. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. It had kept him alive too many times to ignore. Still, he tried to focus on the present. He fixed small things, took care of Rex, and stayed out of trouble. The few friends he had in town liked him for his reliability. "You're the kind of man who doesn't talk much but gets things done," Mr. Keller often said. James would nod and smile. He didn't need attention. He needed purpose. That afternoon, as the sun warmed the driveway, James worked quietly under the hood of his truck. Music played softly from an old radio, and Rex lay a few feet away, watching every move. It was one of those calm, uneventful days that felt ordinary but meaningful. The kind people forget until they're gone. He didn't know that someone was watching from across the street, curious, maybe even a little suspicious, wondering what this quiet man was doing with boxes and tools spread out in the garage. James wiped his hands on a rag, stretched his back, and looked up at the sky. "Good day, boy," he said to Rex. The dog barked once, tail wagging. Life felt stable, peaceful, complete. That's all James wanted, to stay invisible, to let the world move on while he lived his small, quiet life. He didn't know that peace can be fragile. He didn't know that sometimes, even when you've given everything to protect others, trouble can still find you. For now, though, he just smiled, closed the garage door, and tossed Rex a ball. The dog caught it midair, landing gracefully, eyes bright with life. It was a beautiful day. The kind that feels ordinary, right before everything changes. The afternoon sun was warm and steady, spreading a golden light across the quiet street. James had been in his garage for a few hours, working on an old wooden table he wanted to fix for his neighbor. Rex lay near the open door, half asleep, his ears twitching at every sound. It was an ordinary day, calm and peaceful, the kind of day James wished could last forever. A few houses down, a new resident was looking out their window. They didn't know much about the man who lived alone with a large dog. They only saw him sometimes carrying heavy boxes or working with odd tools. From a distance, it looked unusual. That morning, they had seen him cleaning what looked like old military equipment and thought something suspicious might be going on. They didn't mean any harm. They just didn't understand what they were seeing. So, out of concern, they made a quick call to the local police station, thinking it would be best to let them check it out. James had no idea any of this was happening. He hummed softly as he sanded the table. the sound of the rough paper against wood blending with the distant hum of lawnmowers. He stopped now and then to take a sip of water and toss Rex a small piece of biscuit. The dog caught it perfectly, tail wagging, eyes full of trust. For James, this was happiness, small, simple moments that didn't need anything more. A few miles away, 2 local police officers received the dispatch. It was described as a possible suspicious activity, involving a man in military-looking gear. The call didn't sound serious, but protocol said they should check it out. They weren't told much else, only that it was likely a misunderstanding. Still, they headed out unaware of who they were about to meet. James was still working when Rex lifted his head. His ears perked up, eyes sharp. Something in the distance had caught his attention. A car engine, maybe 2. James noticed right away. Years of experience had trained him to sense even the smallest changes. He wiped his hands and looked toward the street. 2 police cars slowly pulled up in front of his house. He frowned slightly, confused but calm. He hadn't done anything wrong, and he had nothing to hide. Rex stood alert but quiet. James spoke softly. "Easy, boy. Stay calm." The dog obeyed, though his body remained tense. James stepped out of the garage, wiping his hands on a rag, trying to understand what was going on. One officer stepped out of the car, his hand resting casually near his belt. The other stayed back, scanning the area. "Afternoon, sir," the first officer said, his tone polite but cautious. "We got a call from someone in the neighborhood. Said you might be handling some equipment that looked like weapons. We just wanted to make sure everything's all right." James blinked in surprise, then smiled a little. "No weapons here, officer. Just fixing a table," he said, gesturing toward the piece of furniture behind him. His voice was calm, friendly. He had dealt with far more tense situations than this. Still, the officer seemed unsure. His eyes drifted to the open garage where a few metal boxes sat neatly against the wall. They looked official, maybe military. "Mind if we take a quick look?" the officer asked. "Of course," James said, stepping aside. "You're welcome to. Nothing to hide." Rex stayed by his side, watching every move. His instincts told him something was different. James could feel the tension in the air but stayed relaxed. He knew how quickly misunderstandings could happen, especially when people didn't have the full picture. The officers walked slowly toward the garage, glancing at the boxes. One of them pointed at the old helmet on the workbench. "That military gear?" he asked. "It was," James said simply. "I served for a long time. Some of it's just memories now." He smiled, hoping to ease the atmosphere. "I keep things tidy. Guess it might have looked odd from across the street." The younger officer nodded, half embarrassed. "Probably just someone being cautious, sir." Rex shifted his weight, watching the movement closely. A gust of wind blew the garage door slightly, making it creak. The sound made the younger officer jump a little. James noticed, his calm voice steady. "It's all right. Just the wind." Everything seemed to be going fine. James had explained, and the officers seemed to understand. They chatted lightly for a moment, and the tension began to fade. But then a neighbor's dog barked loudly across the street. Rex turned sharply toward the noise, reacting on instinct. His sudden movement startled the younger officer, who hadn't expected it. In a split second, the calm moment turned into confusion. "Whoa, hey," the officer said, stepping back quickly. Rex stopped where he was, still near James, but the energy had changed. James reached down, his hand resting gently on Rex's collar. "He's just reacting," he said softly. "He won't hurt anyone." The situation might have ended there, but another patrol car was pulling up at that exact moment. The new arrivals didn't know the details yet. They only saw a tense scene. Officers standing near a man and a large, alert dog. Misunderstandings often start small, and this one was already building. James tried to keep things calm. "Everything's fine here," he said clearly, his tone level. "Just a mix-up." The first officer nodded, trying to wave off his colleagues, but communication in moments like these can be messy. One of the new officers stepped out quickly, hand raised. "Sir, please step back from the dog." James opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Rex barked once, sharp, protective. He wasn't attacking, just warning. But it was enough to make the officers tense up. James's voice rose slightly, firm but controlled. "Easy, Rex, stay." The officers froze for a second, unsure what to do. The air felt heavy, the silence louder than any noise. Then one of the neighbors came outside, phone in hand, recording the scene. James saw it and sighed quietly. He didn't like attention, especially not like this. The lead officer, the first one who had arrived, finally spoke again. "Sir, we understand now. It's fine. Let's just... But the radio on his shoulder buzzed with loud static, cutting him off. The noise startled Rex again. The dog's body stiffened, muscles tight. James knelt down, placing both hands on Rex's shoulders. It's okay, boy. It's okay. His voice was soft, steady, full of the kind of calm that comes from experience. Inside, though, he could feel the sadness starting to build. He didn't like how people jumped to fear before understanding. He knew the officers weren't bad people. They were just reacting the way they'd been trained in a world where everyone was on edge. Still, it hurt to see how fast peace could disappear. After a few tense moments, the situation slowly began to cool down. The first officer gestured for his team to lower their hands. "No threat here," he said into his radio. The others relaxed a little, but the awkwardness lingered. James stood still beside Rex, who was now calm again. "Sorry about the confusion," the younger officer said quietly. "Didn't mean to cause any trouble." "No trouble," James said, shaking his head. "You're just doing your job." He smiled a little, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sometimes the world makes people see danger where there isn't any." The officers nodded, looking almost ashamed. They thanked him for his time and walked back toward their cars. James watched them go, a faint ache in his chest. He knew they hadn't meant harm, but the whole encounter had left a mark. Rex brushed against his leg, sensing his thoughts. James reached down and patted his head. "It's all right, boy. We're okay." As the cars drove off, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The birds started singing again, and distant laughter came from down the street. But something had changed. James could feel it. For years he had lived in peace, trying to blend into normal life. But he realized that sometimes, even in the quietest places, the past and the world's fear could find their way back. He walked back into the garage, closing the door gently behind him. Rex followed, settling down beside his feet. James sat on the edge of the workbench, staring at the floor. He didn't feel angry, just tired. Tired of how quickly people could misunderstand, how fast calm could turn into fear. He took a deep breath and whispered to Rex, "We'll just stay quiet like always." Outside, the street was calm again. To anyone passing by, it looked like nothing had happened. But for James, it was a reminder that peace wasn't something you were given. It was something you had to keep protecting, even when you thought the battles were over. The next morning started quietly, like any other. The sunlight came through the blinds, painting soft lines across the wooden floor. James woke up early, as usual, and went straight to the kitchen to make coffee. Rex followed him, his paws clicking gently against the tiles. To anyone else, it was an ordinary morning, but inside, James still felt the weight of the day before. He hadn't slept well. His mind kept replaying the moment the police had shown up, the confusion, the tension, the way everyone had looked at him. He didn't blame them, not really. They didn't know him. Still, something about it had shaken him. It reminded him of how fragile peace could be, how quickly things could turn even when no one meant harm. He poured himself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching the street outside. It was quiet now. The same cars were parked in the same driveways. A few neighbors walked their dogs, and one waved at him. He waved back, forcing a small smile. Life went on, just like always, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Maybe it was just inside him. Rex sat near the back door, tail tapping lightly against the floor. James looked down at him and smiled. "We're all right," he said softly. "Just another day." The dog tilted his head as if he understood every word. Later that morning, James decided to visit the local animal shelter where he volunteered. It always helped clear his head. The people there were kind, and the dogs, especially the nervous ones, always seemed to find comfort around him. He liked that. It made him feel useful, connected, part of something again. He loaded Rex into the truck and drove through town. The radio played quietly, and the gentle hum of the engine filled the silence. He passed familiar landmarks, the bakery, the small grocery store, the school playground. Everything looked the same, yet it all felt slightly different now. Maybe it was because he knew that people had been talking. Word about the police visit had spread quickly. Small towns were like that. Still, he hoped it would fade away soon. When he arrived at the shelter, the staff greeted him warmly. "Morning, James," said the manager, a friendly woman who always appreciated his help. "You're early today?" "Couldn't sleep," he admitted with a small shrug. "Thought I'd come by," she smiled. "Well, the dogs will be happy." We've got a few new ones that could use your touch. James nodded and followed her inside. The familiar smell of shampoo and disinfectant filled the air. The dogs barked and wagged their tails, some excited, others anxious. He moved slowly among the kennels, speaking softly, letting each one know they were safe. Animals always sensed his calm. It was the same calm that had carried him through years of dangerous missions, though now it served a gentler purpose. After a few hours of work, he felt better. Helping others, even animals, gave him a sense of peace that nothing else could. As he was leaving, the manager stopped him. "Hey, I saw something about you on the local news last night," she said hesitantly. "Was that you?" He froze for a moment. "News?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, just a small piece. Someone posted that video from yesterday. They said the police came by your house. People online were talking about it." James sighed. He didn't want attention, especially not like that. "It was a misunderstanding," he said simply. "Nothing to worry about." "I figured as much," she said kindly. "But you might want to be careful for a few days." "People talk," he nodded. "Thanks." He gave her a polite smile and walked out, Rex close by his side. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. All he'd ever wanted was to live quietly. Now strangers online were talking about him without knowing who he really was. On the drive home, he thought about how easily privacy could vanish. One small mistake, one misunderstanding, and suddenly everyone had an opinion. But he refused to let it bother him too much. He had been through far worse. He'd learned long ago that the only thing you could control was how you responded. When he got home, he went straight to the garage again. It was his safe place. The smell of sawdust and oil, the order of his tools, it all brought him comfort. Rex settled nearby, resting his head on his paws. For a while, James just worked in silence. It helped him think. He fixed the table he'd been working on and began building a small shelf for the living room. His hands were steady, his movements careful. He found peace in the small details. In the afternoon, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find the police chief standing there. The man looked apologetic, holding his hat in his hands. "Mr. Hunter," he began, "I wanted to stop by and personally apologize for what happened yesterday. It shouldn't have gone that way." James nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "Your officers were just doing their job. Still," the chief continued, "it's not right that you had to go through that. I've reviewed the footage and I'd like to make sure the record's clear. We didn't mean any disrespect." "I appreciate that," James said quietly. "It's all in the past." The chief hesitated, then asked, "If you don't mind me asking, were you really in the military? The way you handled everything? I've never seen someone so calm under pressure." James smiled faintly. "Something like that," he said. "Let's just say I've had some experience staying calm." The chief chuckled lightly. "Fair enough. Well, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." After he left, James stood at the door for a long time thinking. The conversation had stirred up memories he usually kept locked away. Faces, places, moments that still lived in the back of his mind. He took a deep breath, trying to let them go again. This wasn't that life anymore. He was just a man in a quiet town, fixing tables and walking his dog. That was all. That evening, he took Rex to the lake. The water shimmered under the soft orange sky. He threw a stick and Rex bounded into the shallow water, tail wagging wildly. Watching him play made James smile for the first time all day. Here, surrounded by trees and silence, he felt at peace again. No cameras, no noise, no misunderstanding, just the sound of water and the steady rhythm of life. As the sun dipped lower, a young boy and his father arrived at the lake to fish. The boy waved shyly at Rex, who wagged his tail in return. The father struck up a short conversation with James, asking if he lived nearby. James nodded, saying, "Just down the road." The man smiled and said, "Nice dog you've got there. Looks smart." "He is," James said softly. "Smarter than most people I've known." They laughed lightly, and for a moment everything felt normal again. The simple human connection reminded James why he'd come to this town in the first place. To live among ordinary people, away from the shadows of his old life. He didn't need anyone to know what he had done before. It was enough to just exist quietly, to help where he could, and to find joy in small things. When night came, he drove home with Rex beside him, the windows down and cool air filling the truck. The town lights flickered in the distance and the radio played a soft tune. He thought about how quickly things could change, how one moment could turn a peaceful life upside down. But he also knew that staying calm, staying kind was the only way through it. At home, he sat on the porch, sipping tea instead of coffee. The stars were bright and the night was still. Rex lay beside him, eyes half closed, content. James reached down to pat his head. "We're all right," he whispered again. "Just gotta keep going." For the first time since the police visit, he felt at peace. Whatever people said, whatever rumors spread, he knew who he was. He didn't need to explain himself to anyone. The people who mattered, the few friends he had, the animals he helped, and the loyal dog at his side, they already knew. Before heading inside, he looked up at the sky one more time. He had spent years looking at the stars from faraway places, wondering if he'd ever find a place where he truly belonged. Now, even with all the noise and misunderstanding, he realized he had found it. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. He stood, gave Rex a soft pat, and said, "Let's get some rest, boy. Tomorrow's another day." The dog stretched and followed him inside. The house was quiet again, filled with the warmth of home. For James, that was enough. Peace wasn't about being unseen. It was about knowing you could face the world calmly no matter what came your way. The next few days passed quietly, but under the surface, things were changing. James could feel it. The video that had been shared online started to spread more than anyone expected. What began as a small clip on a local page was now showing up on bigger sites. People were curious. They wanted to know who the calm man in the video was and why the police had looked so nervous after realizing who he might be. At first, James ignored it. He didn't use social media much and he didn't care what strangers said. But then neighbors started acting differently. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with quiet respect, and a few even with fear. He didn't want any of that. He just wanted his peace back. One afternoon, while he was fixing a broken chair in his garage, an old friend from his military days called him. It had been years since they'd spoken. The sound of that familiar voice brought back a flood of memories. "Hey," the man said, his tone half teasing, half serious. "You made the news again. Didn't think you'd end up famous for a dog story." James let out a slow breath. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "I know," his friend said. "But people are starting to talk. Some of the younger guys recognized you. They're posting your old unit photos. You might want to keep a low profile for a bit." "I already do," James said quietly. "That's the problem." His friend chuckled softly. "You were always the quiet one. Still are. Listen, if it gets messy, you've got people who've got your back. You know that, right?" James smiled faintly. "I appreciate it, but I'll handle it." After hanging up, he stood for a moment looking around his workshop. The walls were lined with tools, and the half-built furniture sat waiting for his hands to bring it to life. He liked things he could fix. Problems that had clear solutions. But this was different. You couldn't just sand down rumors or nail together trust. Later that day, while walking Rex down the main street, a local reporter stopped him. She was polite but curious. "Excuse me, sir," she began. "I'm doing a story about the recent police incident. Some people online are saying you used to serve in the military. Is that true?" James paused, unsure of how to respond. He didn't want to lie, but he also didn't want attention. "I've done my share of service," he said simply. "But that's not really important anymore." She smiled, though clearly she wanted more. "People are calling you a hero," she said. "They say you led some kind of special unit. Is there truth to that?" He met her eyes calmly. "I'm just a man who wants a quiet life," he said. "That's all." Her expression softened. "Fair enough," she said, then thanked him and walked away. Still, he knew the story wouldn't stop there. Once people started digging, it was hard to make them stop. That evening, when he got home, his phone was full of messages. Old teammates, journalists, even strangers. Most were kind, but some wanted details he wasn't willing to share. He didn't reply to any of them. Instead, he turned off the phone, made tea, and sat on the porch with Rex. The night was peaceful again, though he could feel that peace slipping further away each day. A few days later, the police chief stopped by again. This time he wasn't alone. "James," he said, "we've been getting a lot of calls. People asking questions. Reporters trying to confirm your background. I just want to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine," James said softly. "I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," the chief said. "But the truth's out there now. Folks are realizing you're not just some quiet guy. You're someone who's done things most of us can't imagine." James shook his head. "Those days are long gone." "I just want to be left alone." The chief hesitated, then said, "You know, some of the officers were talking. They said what you did out there saved lives. Maybe people should know that." James looked down, his voice calm but firm. "There's no glory in what we did. It's not a story for headlines. It's something you carry quietly." The chief nodded respectfully and didn't push further. As he left, James felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. He had spent years doing things that would never be told, not fully. Now the world was finally seeing a glimpse of it, but for the wrong reasons. Over the next week, more people began showing up near his house. Some just wanted to shake his hand. Others wanted interviews. A few left thank you notes on his porch. It was kind, but it also made him uncomfortable. He had chosen this small town because it was quiet, because no one asked questions. Now it felt like everyone wanted to know him. One evening, while he was closing his workshop, a teenage boy approached him shyly. "Sir," the boy said, "is it true you used to be in Delta Force?" James studied the boy's face for a moment. "Where'd you hear that?" "It's all over the internet," the boy said. "People say you were one of the best." James smiled faintly. "I worked with some good people," he said. "But it's not about being the best. It's about being there for the person next to you. That's what matters." The boy nodded, clearly impressed. "I want to join the army someday," he said. "Maybe do something important." James placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then start by being someone dependable. You don't need medals for that. Just heart." The boy smiled and thanked him before leaving. Watching him go, James felt a small spark of hope. Maybe if this attention inspired someone to live better, it wasn't all bad. Still, the next morning, he received a letter that made him pause. It came from the Defense Department, formal, with an old insignia on the envelope. Inside was a short note thanking him for his years of service and reminding him that he was still under certain confidentiality agreements. It wasn't a warning, just a gentle reminder that some parts of his past needed to remain private. He smiled at that. They didn't have to remind him. He'd already made peace with the idea that some stories weren't meant for the public. Some things were sacred, not because of secrecy, but because of the people involved. Later, as the sun began to set, he took Rex for another walk. The air was cool and the streets were quiet again. A few neighbors waved, not out of curiosity this time, but with genuine warmth. The noise online had started to fade, replaced by real-life kindness. People realized that behind all the talk, he was just a man trying to live simply. As they walked past the lake, James stopped to watch the reflection of the sky on the water. It was calm again. He could hear the crickets, the soft wind through the trees, and Rex's steady breathing beside him. Peace, he thought, was not about being unknown. It was about being understood, even just a little. When they got home, he sat on the porch, looking out at the quiet street. His phone buzzed again, but this time it was a message from the same boy he'd met earlier. It said, "Thank you for talking to me. I'm going to work hard, just like you said." James smiled and typed a short reply. "Proud of you. Keep going." Then he set the phone aside and leaned back in his chair. The stars were out again, bright and clear. For the first time in weeks, he felt that familiar calm returning. Maybe the world now knew who he was, but that didn't change the kind of man he chose to be. Quiet, steady, kind. That was enough. Life had a way of testing people, but it also had a way of settling back into balance. He took a deep breath, feeling grateful for the quiet moments, for his loyal dog, for the chance to start again, no matter how many times life tried to pull him back into the past. Whatever came next, he would face it the same way he always had, with patience, calm, and heart. The weeks that followed brought a quiet sort of peace back into James's life. The world had finally moved on from the story. The internet found new things to argue about, and the people in town no longer whispered when he walked by. They simply smiled, waved, and treated him like they always had. He appreciated that more than anything. The air was turning colder now. Autumn had come, and the trees around the lake were dressed in red and gold. James liked walking with Rex along the path, watching the leaves fall and hearing them crunch beneath his boots. The calm rhythm of nature was what he had always needed. It reminded him that life, no matter how chaotic it could get, always found a way to return to balance. Every morning he still rose early, the way he had for years during his service. The habit never left him, but instead of suiting up for missions, he now brewed coffee, opened the windows to let in the cool breeze, and sat quietly on the porch. Sometimes the sunrise was enough to fill him with a sense of peace that no medal ever could. A few of his old teammates reached out now and then. They'd check on him, share updates, or ask if he'd ever thought about teaching the younger generation. "You could train recruits," one of them said. "Show them what real discipline looks like." James always smiled but never gave a clear answer. He didn't want to return to that world. Not because he was bitter, but because he had found something better. A simpler kind of purpose. One crisp morning, as he worked on a new wooden bench behind his workshop, a familiar truck pulled into the driveway. It was the police chief. He stepped out, hands in his pockets, wearing the same friendly smile as before. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "Go ahead," James said, wiping his hands on a cloth. The chief sat down, looking around at the trees swaying in the breeze. "You've done a lot for this town, you know," he said. "People feel safer just knowing someone like you's around." James shook his head slightly. "Safety isn't about who's around. It's about how people treat each other." The chief nodded thoughtfully. "You're right about that. Still, I wanted to say thank you. Not just for your service back then, but for the way you handled everything here. You showed more patience than most would have." James looked out toward the road. "Anger never fixes anything." "I learned that a long time ago," the chief smiled. "Well, it worked. Folks respect you now more than ever." After a short silence, the chief stood up and patted him on the shoulder. "If you ever need anything, my door's open." "Appreciate it," James said, and watched as the truck rolled away down the dirt road. Later that day, James sat with Rex near the lake again. The sun was low, turning the water orange and pink. He thought about everything that had happened. The day of the accident, the days after, the sudden burst of attention that had upended his quiet life. It was strange how quickly things could change. But now sitting there, he realized something important. He couldn't control what happened around him, but he could control how he faced it. That was the lesson that had carried him through everything: war, loss, and now peace. Rex rested his head on his knee, and James scratched behind his ear. "We made it through, didn't we?" he said softly. The dog wagged his tail as if he understood every word. A few days later, James received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, something rare in those days. It came from the young man who had spoken to him about joining the army. The letter was simple and sincere. It said that he had enrolled in a training program and wanted to thank James for inspiring him. He promised to carry himself with honesty and courage the way James had told him to. Reading that, James felt something warm stir in his chest. Maybe that was what all of this had been for. Not recognition, not apology, but a chance to make a small difference in someone's life. Sometimes the smallest actions had the longest echoes. That evening, he built a small fire in his backyard pit. The sky was clear, full of stars. He sat quietly, listening to the soft crackle of wood and the sounds of the night. He thought about his old teammates, the ones who made it home and the ones who didn't. He thought about the things he had lost, but also about the peace he had finally found. As he sat there, the wind carried the smell of pine and smoke. It reminded him of long nights in distant places, when he and his team would sit in silence, each man lost in his own thoughts. Back then, he didn't realize how precious that silence was. Now it was everything. The next morning, he woke early again. The sun hadn't risen yet, and the world was still wrapped in darkness. He brewed his coffee, then walked down to the lake. The surface was calm, a perfect mirror. As the first light broke over the trees, he stood there quietly, feeling the warmth spread across the water. In that moment, he understood what peace really meant. Not forgetting the past, but learning to live gently with it. Life in the town slowly returned to its rhythm. The children played outside again, the neighbors greeted each other, and the police went back to their usual routines. Sometimes people still mentioned his name, but now it was with quiet respect, not curiosity. He liked it that way. One afternoon, while he was closing the shop, a man stopped by with his young daughter. She handed James a small drawing, a picture of a man and a dog standing beside a lake. In her shaky handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for being kind." James smiled and crouched to her level. "That's beautiful," he said. "Can I keep it?" She nodded eagerly, and her father thanked him before they left. He pinned the drawing to the wall of his workshop right above his workbench. It was a small thing, but it meant more to him than any medal ever could. As the months passed, the story of what happened became just another memory. It faded from headlines and conversations, but it stayed with James in quieter ways. He learned that peace wasn't about being invisible. It was about being content with who you were, even when the world saw you differently. One night, as he sat on his porch, he watched the stars twinkle above. Rex lay beside him, half asleep. The air was cool, the night still. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed softly. He thought about how far he'd come, from battlefields to back roads, from chaos to calm. Life had tested him, but it had also given him something worth protecting. Peace of mind, a loyal friend, and a place to call home. He leaned back, took a slow breath, and smiled to himself. "We're right where we're supposed to be," he whispered. And as the night deepened around him, James felt completely at ease. Not because the world was perfect, but because he had finally learned that peace was something you built, one quiet moment at a time.